Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and we are happy to have you with us. A little bit of quarterback talk on the show today. We did some of that the other day. We're going to do some of that today as well because of some very interesting things that Carson Beck has recently said. So we'll address some of that with you here. Obviously, getting ready for spring practice next week. Our buddy Terrence Edwards stops by. I'll ask Terrence about the quarterback situation. Also, we talked wide receiver the other day a little bit. I want to kind of continue that conversation with Terrence. He's always a great guy to do with that. We got some interesting stuff around the SEC here today, including possible dark horse being touted for the national championship that isn't Georgia. We'll talk about that. Of course, Georgia's not really a dark horse anyway. There was a decommitment yesterday. We'll sort of figure out what all that means for the Dogs here coming up there too. And one of our very faithful viewers has a very funny golden shoe. So not so much funny, but as it is just kind of fun. Let's say it that way. We'll get to that before it's all said and done there today there as well. So we're going to help you get ready for spring practice. I think it's all going to be really, really fun. We're happy to have you with us as we do. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Meriwether and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So I had somebody the other day say something to me that I was actually kind of caught off guard by. Not so much caught off guard, I was a little bit surprised to hear it, but I guess I kind of understand where it's coming from. This person said to me, looking ahead to the start of spring practice, he said, I'm actually glad that Arch Manning didn't come to Georgia. Now, I hadn't really thought about Arch Manning very much. Obviously, we spent this time about a year ago talking about Arch Manning a lot. The big-time quarterback at that time, ranked the number one prospect in the entire country, the 5-star. I thought he was going to come to Georgia. Seemed like for a while he might. Then right there early summer made that commitment to Texas. And listen, no disrespect to Arch, and this is not sour grapes, I don't think, or anything like that. I just sort of moved on. Georgia went on to win another national championship. Whether it did or didn't have Arch didn't seem all that interesting to me anymore just because whoever Georgia had seemed to be working out pretty well. Stetson Bennett kind of ends his career as a historic figure. The next in line at quarterback at Georgia will probably be pretty good no matter who it is. More on that coming up in a moment. I just hadn't thought much about Arch Manning. But this person said to me, I'm glad that Arch Manning isn't coming here because the thought is not that Arch Manning is or isn't a good quarterback. Frankly, we don't really quite know yet how good Arch Manning's going to be at Texas. That's going to be a fun competition to watch with Quinn Ewers. It's kind of taking place right now. Steve Sarkisian has spoken out about that, and we've told you something about that, of what Sarkisian's had to say about that competition between Ewers and Manning. But the statement that was made to me about Arch Manning was more along the lines of, it'd just be too hysterical, it'd be too high-strung, it'd be too kind of going in the direction of what Georgia football just hasn't been the last couple of years. You know, Georgia has been, I think, a program in which so much has been decided on the field, the sort of typical hysteria of who is coming here as a recruit, who isn't coming here as a recruit, that stuff just doesn't seem to matter as much anymore. That Georgia seems to be fine kind of no matter who it has, that Georgia just seems to be in pretty good situation there with that. Now, I'll say the same thing about like a Dylan Raiola. If Raiola goes to USC, if he goes to Nebraska, if he goes to Georgia, don't most of us just sort of think that whatever Raiola chooses to do, Georgia's just going to be fine? And the same thing with Arch Manning a year ago. Manning chose not to go to Georgia. I don't know how many Georgia fans are like, gosh, it'd be so much better right now if Arch Manning was here at UGA. I think the results on the field have kind of changed all of that. So I say all of that to say this here for a moment, that next week, Georgia begins another quarterback competition. We've seen a few of these over the years in the Kirby Smart era. And I think because of what Georgia's done on the field, winning national championships, and frankly doing it with a quarterback that almost no one expected to have that level of success, that sort of sets up a mindset that I think should exist for Georgia fans where, hey, the stakes in all this are actually probably pretty low. You know, all of a sudden now, you don't have to have a real high stress level. The person that talked about Arch Manning kind of creating sort of a hysterical quarterback competition because of how famous his last name is. You actually don't really need that at Georgia moving forward, going on, anymore, because you've already shown you can win back-to-back national championships with Stetson Bennett at quarterback, and there's certainly reason to believe that whether it's Carson Beck or Brock Vandegrift or Gunnar Stockton, they could be as well set up for the future to keep on winning those national championships as Stetson Bennett is these last couple of years. And I think that is probably the truth. I think that's probably the right thing, is that Georgia fans have spent plenty of time, both in the recent history and kind of, not too distant past in the early days of Kirby Smart. Georgia fans have spent plenty of time in the past kind of at each other's throat as it relates to a quarterback debate, a quarterback argument. That's just the nature of the position. It generates a lot of hot takes, whether you're watching, Skip Bayless on Fox Sports 1 or Stephen A. Smith on ESPN or just hanging out with, your friends at a tailgate. Quarterback talk seems to generate big takes and at times intense debate. But for Georgia, surely by now, given the success the program has had, whatever goes on with Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton shouldn't be nearly as contentious as previous quarterback discussions that at times turn into arguments with Georgia fans should have been. There is no Arch Manning here. There is no famous last name. There are just three really talented guys who are getting ready to go into a competition with each other. Different fans may prefer different guys, but ultimately this is the kind of thing that Georgia fans starting next week, I think, ought to be set up to start having some fun with. And knowing that whichever quarterback emerges is probably a pretty good quarterback playing for a very good team, and all of this is just good entertainment and not the kind of thing that anybody ought to get all that worked up about the way that you might would get worked up if Manning were here. By the way, more on that in a moment. We'll do this later on the show. I'll kind of give you a little bit more proof on what I'm saying about Arch Manning, but just kind of put a pin in that for right now. So that's kind of the stage of where things are with this quarterback competition at the moment. However, one of the guys in the midst of this competition, one of the trio, and one of the dudes that's probably thought to be maybe the slight favorite, if not slight favorite, maybe the favorite, but at the very least a slight favorite to emerge as the Georgia starter, that's Carson Beck. Why do we say that about Beck? Because Beck's been here the longest. Beck was the number 2 quarterback a year ago. He would seem to be next in line, and that sort of next in line position gives him at least first shot to kind of take the reins of this offense here this year. But one of the things we've also talked about, a little bit as of late is, okay, well, how do recent changes with the Georgia program kind of change this for Carson Beck? Because, listen, if you're leading a golf tournament, you don't want it to start raining because all of a sudden that brings a little bit of change and a little bit of a new scenario in play. If you're leading something, you want the circumstances to stay the way they are and just keep rolling right on towards the eventual outcome. And in a quarterback competition, you might say the same thing of, hey, if I'm the number 2, if I'm next in line, then I want to keep my offensive coordinator. I want to keep all these things in place because this is already an environment that I've been kind of thriving in. Well, that's not the situation at Georgia. As you know, Todd Monken leaves. He goes on to the Baltimore Ravens. Mike Bobo steps in as offensive coordinator. Does that have any impact on Carson Beck at all? Some of us have kind of wondered this. What does it mean for the guy who was number 2? The guy who'll choose this year's number 1 is a different guy than the offensive coordinator was a year ago. Well, it just so happens that Carson Beck has recently discussed this. Beck was a guest on, you've heard us talk about the Players Lounge before. We've had on Aaron Murray and Keith Marshall, some of the guys that helped found the Players Lounge. Beck was a guest on a Players Lounge podcast. I saw this on YouTube. When I post the show, the full show later on at DawgNation.com, our podcast, I'll put a link to this YouTube page so you can go watch the interview for yourself. I believe our buddy Connor Riley has a story up on this there as well. You can probably see the link to that video there in that too. It's kind of a wide-ranging interview. It's worth going to watch the full thing. Obviously, we don't have time to play a full interview. You need to go watch it for yourself to see the full thing. He talks about Carson Beck's belief on the quarterback competition and what he thought about Todd Monken and all kinds of really cool stuff from Beck. The idea of now he's sort of the old man figure in this quarterback room, the way that Stetson Bennett would have been before. Beck says a lot of really interesting things in this interview. You should seek it out and find it. Watch the full thing for yourself with our friends at the Players Lounge to be able to kind of see this for yourself. But there are a couple of things I want to highlight from the interview, in particular this. As we said a moment ago, if you're Carson Beck, all of a sudden what's supposed to be, in your mind, your year at Georgia, where you take the step from being the number 2 quarterback to become the number 1 quarterback, all of a sudden there's a new set of circumstances in place. All of a sudden there's a new offensive coordinator. You've been working with and learning from Todd Monken these last couple of years, but now it's Mike Bobo who's at the helm. And some people, I think, have wondered, and at times maybe I've kind of wondered this a little bit too, does that have a negative impact on Beck's chances of kind of ascending to this starter's role here at quarterback at Georgia? Well, Carson Beck actually had an answer for that. And what we find out from Carson Beck in the midst of all this discussion is that he actually already has developed what sounds like a pretty good relationship with Mike Bobo, and it actually started before last season was done. I think this is really interesting stuff from Carson on his new offensive coordinator ahead of the start of spring practice next week with the Players Lounge. This is Carson Beck talking about his early impressions of new Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo. Take a listen to this.
Yeah, no, I really like Coach Bobo, and whenever Coach Faulkner left last year, whenever he went to Tech, Bobo worked with us for a few days leading up to the national championship. And I was like, I really like this guy. He worked the hell out of us. Our indies were fast-paced, up-tempo. I was like, okay, like this guy, he knows what he's doing. And then obviously when he got named OC, I was obviously very excited about that because it's like in-house, It's not like we're taking somebody from out. So I'm like, okay, we might keep some of the same stuff. Obviously, he's going to put his spin on it. But not going out of, our organization and keeping someone that has been a part of Georgia for such a long time, I really enjoy, and obviously we've met and talked, but it'll be a lot of fun. And I think our offense will have a new spin on it for sure.
I like a lot about that statement. I think there are a few things you ought to pull out of that. First of all, Carson Beck expresses a level of comfort with Mike Bobo, comfort from having spent time with him, comfort from having seen Bobo take on a larger role with this team at the time in which Buster Faulkner was leaving to go to Georgia Tech. We know that Faulkner was on the field for the national championship game, but I guess in some of those practices leading up to that, maybe Faulkner was in Atlanta getting ready for his new job, and so therefore Beck got more exposure to Mike Bobo. So as you begin spring practice here right now, according to the words that you're hearing from Carson Beck in that statement, that there's already a level of comfort, conversation since then, but a little bit of time to work together in practice. This is not a guy that Carson Beck feels the need to introduce himself to or be introduced to. Beck sounds like he sort of feels like he already knows Mike Bobo, which I think could be a valuable commodity for him as he tries to win this starting job later on this spring. Here's the other thing, too. We all obviously know that Mike Bobo, because he spent a lot of time here at Georgia and because of how successful Todd Monken was, is that Bobo is a little bit of a lightning rod type figure. Back in the day, kind of old school football conversation. Anything something went wrong for Georgia, it seems like Bobo was there to kind of take the brunt of that criticism. The easiest thing in football is to always kind of criticize the play caller because a play call that doesn't work is obviously frustrating for fans. So Bobo got some of that at the time. There was a little bit of, I don't want to say controversy, but certainly intense debate around Bobo's hire when it was made, and yet you hear from Carson Beck in that clip. Now you may say, well, what else is he going to say? He's going to say good things, which is maybe true. That's fine. But nonetheless, Carson Beck acts like the hire of Mike Bobo for Georgia was a good thing. Or maybe more specifically, he acts like the hire of Mike Bobo might be a good thing for him specifically, which I kind of find to be pretty interesting. It seems like he's receiving that news pretty well and kind of enthusiastic about it. And then at the end there, this is where, Beck maybe kind of gives you, I guess, the strongest opinion of anything that he says there in that particular clip. He goes on to talk about what this might mean, the fact that Bobo, who had been here this past year, now steps up as offensive coordinator. He says, I like the idea of holding on to some of the things we've had here in the past, obviously our architect of that being Todd Monken, added to Mike Bobo maybe putting his own spin on this offense. I got to tell you, I kind of like the idea of all that there as well. To me, that sounds like a pretty good way to construct this Georgia offense here this year. A lot of what Todd Monken had in place here at Georgia clearly worked. A guy like Mike Bobo, watching this unfold the last couple of years, bringing some of the best of Monken into 2023, why would you not want to do that? Seems like you probably would. But Mike Bobo is also an accomplished coach in his own right. A lot of the Georgia offenses that he led were quite successful here at UGA, including his last Georgia offense in 2014, which is still the high water mark in terms of points per game total in the history of Georgia football. Some of those concepts that Bobo has being added to this could be a Georgia offense that's both very difficult for opponents and very fun to watch. And I think that Carson Beck's words there, his enthusiasm, his excitement about playing with Mike Bobo, playing for Mike Bobo, is the kind of thing that I think that fans ought to want to notice. I think that's really good stuff from the Players Lounge with Carson Beck there on that. Then, let me give you one more thing here for a moment there as well, because One of the other topics that come up in this particular interview is the fact that over the course of the last few years, Carson Beck has just chosen to be really patient. He's chosen to stick it out. He's chosen to hang here at Georgia. And as Aaron Murray, who's the Grand Inquisitor on this particular interview, as Murray points out, hey, a lot of the guys around college football the last few years, you can go and look at the facts for yourself. Huge number of 4- and 5-star quarterbacks end up transferring away from the program they signed with. Thus far, Beck kind of stands as one of the rare outliers, someone who's chosen not to do that here thus far. I think this is a very fair question. It sets up an interesting answer. Carson, how come so many guys have transferred, but up to this point in time, you've chosen not to do that? What's that about for you? What makes you different than some of your classmates when you came to college football, or some of the guys who've been elite recruits in the years since then? What makes you different than that? Why have you stuck it out here at Georgia? Once again, from the Players Lounge, good stuff. Carson Beck on his decision to remain at Georgia and kind of stick it out. Here's Carson.
Obviously, I came here for a reason in the first place. So kind of obviously things don't go your way sometimes, like you said, and waiting isn't the first option, as you just clearly stated with the percentages of people that have left and quarterbacks that have left. But for me, I don't know. Like I said, I came here for a reason, and obviously the situation didn't work out the way I wanted to, but it's not my plan. And at the end of the day, things are going to work out the way they're supposed to. And I feel like, the knowledge that I've been able to gain and watch two really good quarterbacks and Stetson, who have really good 2 last years, kind of just develop underneath that and make sure that when I do finally get my chance, that I'm fully ready and capable for anything that might be thrown my way.
We had one of our video commenters, I think it was yesterday, say that we should take the audio of Nolan Smith from his press conference part of the NFL Scouting Combine and play that for all these quarterbacks. Nolan made the pitch of, hey, don't just transfer at the first sign of trouble. Stick it out. He said, are you going to transfer on your wife? Going to transfer on your kids? Are you going to just tuck tail and run in life as an adult when you're out of college because things get hard? Are you going to stick it out then? Well, this is the time in which you learn to stick it out and kind of handle adversity and do what's hard and compete for playing time. Nolan Smith had really strong words on this the other day. We actually played it on the show, and somebody suggested, hey, maybe that audio ought to be played for these quarterbacks. Well, it sounds like in the case of Carson Beck, he's already heard that, or at least he has that sentiment in his own head there too, which is, I want to be the starting quarterback. And I got no problem with Carson Beck saying, hey, I want to be the starting quarterback. I expect to be the starting quarterback. It hasn't worked out for me thus far in that respect. That's just real life. That's just reality, is that I'm here to win this job, and I hadn't done it yet. Maybe at one point in time I thought I would, and it didn't happen. And now I get my chance, and I'm going to give it everything I've got on this. I think that's very candid, very honest remarks from Carson Beck. And as we pointed out a number of times here, it might be true and it might be wise to understand that actually staying at one place and seeing it through to the end might actually be a lot more incentivized than you realize, because you can point out all kinds of transfer quarterbacks, including guys who've transferred here to UGA, who ended up not quite having the career they thought they were after that transfer. Whereas guys, and one of the names we mentioned a lot here is Mac Jones. Mac Jones didn't bounce around. Mac Jones at Alabama didn't go somewhere else. And while it remains to be seen how good of an NFL quarterback he's going to end up being, he was a first-round pick, and he was a national champion, pandemic year, but nonetheless, he was a national champion there at Alabama. That was the reward he got for sticking it out. He was buried on the depth chart. He came in the same year that Tua Tagovailoa did. Really, no one thought Mac Jones would be the guy to kind of rise to the level that he did at Alabama, but sometimes patience is rewarded. And maybe for Carson Beck, who's had plenty of time to transfer from Georgia, maybe eventually his patience will be rewarded there as well. Or maybe it's a guy like Brock Vandagriff, who hasn't been here quite as long as Carson has, but he has been here himself when he's had opportunities to go other places. Maybe it's his patience that gets rewarded. Either way, I think this is going to be a great quarterback competition for Georgia. I think it's going to be fun for fans to watch. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this guy's my preferred choice or that guy's my preferred choice. There's nothing wrong with all of that. But ultimately, the stakes for Georgia in a situation like this are actually pretty low. It's already shown you can win back-to-back national championships. It's going to be the favorite to win again this year, no matter which of these guys emerge. So let's be entertained by it. Let's watch these guys put the best of themselves on display. We'll see it for ourselves on G-Day. We'll hear it in terms of how it's discussed in some of these spring practices. When it's all said and done, whether it's Carson Beck or one of the younger guys nipping at his heels, Georgia should be in a pretty good position as far as the quarterback position goes here in 2023. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just so happy to have you with us for what we are doing today. And a big thanks to our friends from Meriwether and Tharp for making it all possible there as well. They are your source for Georgia divorce. When you hear me say that, I know what your question is. Why are we talking about divorce? That's a loaded word for a lot of you, either because you've been through one, you're fearful you might go through one, or you view it as this really challenging time for your friends who've gone through that same situation. I'm not here to dispute any of that. It is a scary, confusing word. It is a word that brings a lot of, at times, negative weight with it. Totally understand that. But also, it's a situation for, in an audience the size of ours, a portion of our audience dealing with this as a reality in their life right now. And you know this. Reality's got to be confronted. You know, you've tried everything you can to save the relationship, and I think you're wise to do that. But after all those efforts, all those attempts, if it's just irreconcilable, if it's just the kind of thing that's not going to be able to be put back together, then discussing the next step, setting yourself up for a happier next season of your life, that is really important. That's what our friends at Meriwether and Tharp are all about, because the law here can be leveraged to your benefit. There are things to understand about the law that can protect your finances, that can protect your relationships, including that with your children, and really put you in a position, as I said before, to be happier in the future than you might be right now. And that is obviously a very valuable thing, taking advantage of every day you're given. Clearly, you want to do everything you can to do that, and that's what our friends at Meriwether and Tharp give you a chance to do. So I want you to find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Have that free initial consultation with one of their attorneys. I know people who've used their services. I know people who didn't want to get divorced but felt like they needed to, felt like they had to, and now they're happier now because of the way in which Meriwether and Tharp has kind of walked them through all of this. And I do believe, genuinely, sincerely, they can do that for you too. So please find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. They are your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we're going to talk to Terrence Edwards here coming up in just a couple of minutes, and that's going to be fun. Always great on a Thursday. We'll do some of the quarterback stuff with him when we get there. Prior to that, I want to kind of follow up on what we just heard from Carson Beck with the Players Lounge. You know, on Tuesday on our show, we had former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm on the show. Now, Jake's a guy that has hung around the Georgia football facility a good bit, I think, since his Georgia career came to an end. He knows some of these guys, really, I guess all of them personally. And on Tuesday, we had a really fun time. And I think it's worth going back and hearing the full interview from Jake Fromm on our show from Tuesday if you hadn't had a chance to hear that yet. But we just kind of went through each quarterback in the competition. Obviously, Carson Beck is a guy that gets a lot of attention because that's the guy a lot of folks assume will emerge as the starter here. But both Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton, I believe, are going to be heard from in a big way on all of this. So on Tuesday, a guy who knows the position, knows the program, knows these guys personally and individually, I asked Jake Fromm, hey, walk me through each one of these guys. Tell me what they bring specifically into this competition. And I thought Jake's words on this were really very good. So if you don't mind, I want to go through each quarterback in the competition here for a moment, starting with Jake Fromm's assessment of what makes Carson Beck a formidable challenger in this quarterback competition. This is Jake Fromm.
He brings the arm. He brings the life to this deep play-action attack. Carson's a guy who can make all the throws on the football field. And, you know, as a coordinator, as a play caller, you're not going to be scared to call these deeper shots. And you're going to want to be aggressive because you know you have a guy in the offense who can make all the throws. And a guy who's been around, has experience, has gone in and played in games. And even though it wasn't necessarily the most ideal situation, going in the way he did, up big in games and still being able to move the offense, get down and still score points, to me that says a lot.
I love the way that Jake Fromm describes that. He's used a couple of interesting words. Something to the effect of Carson Beck brings some life to the Georgia offense, that if you're an offensive coordinator, you've got Beck as your quarterback because of the way that he does throw it, and we don't have to be quarterback scouts ourselves or a former quarterback like Jake Fromm to recognize some of the video things we've seen from Beck or in moments when he's been in the game. This is a guy that's very comfortable throwing it. Jake says he can throw the ball anywhere on the field, and so therefore, as an offensive coordinator, you're not scared to push any button. You're not holding back part of your playbook because you're not sure Beck can make the throw. You have the belief that Beck can make every throw, and so therefore you are willing to be aggressive with your play calling. I think it takes a former quarterback to understand how fully that might be true. And I think that Jake gives a pretty thorough assessment of what Carson Beck, who we just heard from a moment ago, brings into this quarterback competition. But how about another guy here? How about Brock Vandagriff? Vandagriff was the highest-rated recruit of this trio. He's been kind of working as number 3 quarterback this past season, now stepping up for his chance to maybe prove worthy of being the starter. What does Brock Vandagriff bring to this quarterback competition? Once again, here's Jake Fromm.
So with Brock, I think what you get is a bigger-bodied Stetson, right? You get a guy who can get out of the pocket, make plays with his arm, with his feet, a guy that you get some zone read opportunities. You get into the red zone, design quarterback runs like we saw in the national championship game with Stetson. So with Brock, you kind of get very similar of a same offense, a guy who has an arm as well, can make the same throws. And so, with that, you really kind of get more of what you've seen with maybe and arguably maybe a better athlete.
So I think that's also in its own right kind of an interesting description. And if we operate from the assumption, well, Carson Beck's the favorite because he's the number 2 and he's the guy that a lot of fans seem to be lining up around right now, then this is the kind of thing that Carson has to match, or at least come close to matching, if he's going to truly emerge as the starter. You hear from Jake Fromm right there a pretty profuse level of praise for Vandagriff's athleticism, calling him bigger-bodied Stetson Bennett. Let me ask you this. How many times over the course of the last couple of years were you glad to have Stetson Bennett's athleticism? I think there are a number of times when his ability to keep the football and run with it, not just scramble to keep a play alive, but also run and getting positive yardage, there was plenty of time when you were happy that you had that. There was plenty of time in which that athleticism was incredibly valuable. In fact, one of the things we've heard from the Georgia coaching staff, in kind of this transition of the new year is they look at mobility of a quarterback as being kind of a deciding factor of, can you move around? Can you show that athleticism? Can you bring that extra dimension to the quarterback game? It's one of the things that gave Stetson the nod over JT Daniels, and it's one of the things that I think is going to be viewed as pivotal in this quarterback competition too, which is not the same thing as saying, therefore Vandagriff's going to win it, but it is the same thing as saying, hey, if you're a Gunnar Stockton or if you're a Carson Beck, your ability to come close to matching the athleticism that Vandagriff is capable of showing, who is very, very capable with his legs, your ability to do that is going to go a long way towards determining, if it's not Vandagriff who wins the quarterback competition, how athletic, moving around with his legs, can the eventual winner be? I think that's probably a fair kind of view of that you get from Jake Fromm. Then finally, Gunnar Stockton, the other guy in all of this. We talked about Stockton on the show the other day. My belief that Stockton is probably more in this than kind of the national media observer might assume, given the fact the national media observer is trying to observe everyone in the nation. They're just not quite as plugged in to what's happening here at Georgia as many of us are going to be. And they, I believe, are in for a surprise when they start hearing about a third quarterback in this discussion to go along with Brock Vandagriff and Carson Beck, 2 guys that have posted Heisman odds right now. Stockton is also, I think, in all of this too. What does Gunnar bring to this competition? Once again, here is Jake Fromm.
I love Gunnar. See, me and Gunnar, I kind of see a lot of myself in Gunnar. A guy who's not going to blow you away necessarily with his arm, a guy who's not going to blow you away with his feet, but a guy who's just going to play good, sound football, who's going to get the offense in the right situations and play good football. He's going to complete balls. He's going to play tough. He's going to play physical. And he's going to play confidently for the offense and move the chains and score points. So, with Gunnar, you get a guy who is really smart, a guy who's going to know this offense, know everything in and out, and always get the offense in the right situation most of the time and make the right play most of the time.
So I think that Jake Fromm's description, and he's not really favoring one guy over the other, but I think his description is really fair there. And if you've got Carson Beck, who's just an amazing thrower, you've got Brock Vandagriff, who's an amazing athlete, you've got Gunnar Stockton, who brings a level of physical, mental toughness and a level of intelligence. Doesn't that sound like a great competition? And, one guy's maybe got a little bit more of one thing than the other guy does, and this guy's got a little bit more of that than that. But doesn't that all sound like the kind of competition that could set up to be really entertaining for us and eventually produce a really stout, strong winner there as well. And I'm pretty ambivalent about who it might be. Maybe it is Beck because he's been here longest, or maybe it's somebody else because of some other factor. But one way or another, I think it sets up to be a really, really good competition. We'll talk to Terrence Edwards more about that in a moment. First, let me remind you, there's also time for you to enter for your chance to win a great Marlowe's Tavern VIP Insider Lunch that we're going to be doing coming up in just a few days. You've heard me tell you about this by now. It's going to be taking place on Tuesday, March 21st. It's going to be myself hanging out with John Stinchcomb. Of course, John is our DawgNation insider from Marlowe's Tavern. You always get a chance to hear great things from him on our show. And during this lunch, I'll have a great chance to have a fun private conversation with him there as well. In fact, we're going to have 4 winners who each get to bring a guest to this special lunch coming up on Tuesday, March 21st, the Marlowe's there in Dunwoody, taking place at noon. It's going to be an unbelievable time. And your chance to win on this continues. So go to DawgNation.com, click for your chance to enter. We'll be taking entries all the way through March 14th and then announcing the winners on March 15th. So go to DawgNation.com for more on this. We got a VIP Insider Lunch coming up at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody on Tuesday, March 21st. I'm going to be there. John Stinch going to be there. And you have a chance to be there as well. So go to DawgNation.com for more on your chance to win on that. All right, so earlier I talked about hysteria around Arch Manning. Before the show is done, I'm going to give you a little bit of evidence that kind of proves the point that I was making, and we'll talk about the fact that Georgia recently had a decommitment. That's worth kicking around here for a moment there as well. But for now, spring practice next week, continuing the quarterback conversation, everything else going on around the Dogs. Let us talk to former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, so we'll bring on Terrence Edwards here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Always great to have Terrence as a part of the program. Terrence, before you joined us, we heard a little bit from Carson Beck. He was interviewed by the Players Lounge, thought he gave some good stuff and even more good stuff than we just played. You can go hear the full interview yourself there and check that out. We also heard Jake Fromm from our show on Tuesday kind of breaking down each of the 3 quarterbacks in this competition. Let me ask you a question. I'll put you in the spot here for a moment. Do you favor one guy over the other right now based on what you think you know about them?
I favor Carson Beck right now only because of the experience that he has. And I know it's not a lot, but he has a little bit more game experience than the other ones, and that goes a long way. But talent-wise, I just think Gunner, to me, talent-wise, what he brings to the table with his athletic ability to run the football and to throw the football, to me, that's who I would love to see. But it's going to be an interesting battle going into spring. And now that, Mike Bobo is in control of the offense, I think it's more of a traditional wide open competition. I think probably with Monken, he probably would favor Carson a little bit. But with Mike, I think it's going to be a true open competition and the best man wins.
So what you just said is something I'll probably give the belief of, is that if I'm Carson Beck, I'm probably a little, like my instinct, I think, would be a little bit more nervous because, hey, the guy that I've been with the last couple of years not here anymore, now it's Mike Bobo. But we just heard from Carson on this, and the fact that Bobo was here last year, the fact that Carson got a chance to work a little bit more closely with Bobo leading into the national championship because Buster Faulkner wasn't around quite as much, that all of a sudden maybe that kind of takes what might be a challenge, new offensive coordinator, and in the case of Carson Beck, he says, hey, I'm actually a little bit more comfortable with this. This is a guy that I actually feel like I do know a little bit. This is not kind of some sort of cold, voice from outside the program. This is a guy that's been here and been around what we're doing. I'm sure privately Carson Beck would probably say, I wish Todd Monken was still here. You could understand why he might feel that way. But it sounds like he's got a level of comfort with Mike Bobo that's actually maybe a little higher than I thought it might be, and the fact that Bobo's been around and been with him seems to be a positive factor in the eyes of Beck. What do you think about that?
I think so. I think it is positive that the quarterbacks actually have a familiar face that they know, and it's not somebody that just is completely new. But I'm very interested in how much communication any of the quarterbacks had with Bobo, because when I'm there, Bobo was normally with Brian McClendon with the receivers, and he floated around. And like Stetson said, he didn't have much communication with Coach Bobo while he was there. So I don't know how much Bobo actually worked with them, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. with them happen.
Yeah, no doubt about that. One of the things that we've also kind of talked about a little bit too is that over the years, just at different times, including recently, whether it be the JT Daniels Stetson Bennett thing or whatever else, Georgia fans have sort of found a reason at time to sort of argue with each other over the quarterback spot. Quarterback brings a lot of hot takes. Fans love the debate. TV's always debating about quarterbacks. It's just one of those positions that brings out a lot of opinions and a lot of strong takes here. I sort of hope, Terrence, and maybe this will end up being just the kind of thing that does end up being true. I sort of hope, though, that for Georgia here right now, this is the kind of quarterback competition that doesn't bring on any kind of negativity. Like, to me, this is just fun. You've got three quarterbacks who all three seem to be excellent at a different area, and it's simply a matter of let the best man win. And, frankly, I'm pretty ambivalent about who it ends up being. If it's Carson, I think that's great. If it's one of the other guys, I think that's great there, too. I don't have a lot of strong feeling about who I think it should be or who I want it to be. We may have lost Terrence there on that, so I'll kind of tap dance here for a moment, see if we can get him back on. But the point I'm going to ask Terrence about is I don't necessarily have a strong feeling about this. You heard me say this a moment ago too, is I think you kind of be okay sort of talking to anybody or be okay with sort of any of these quarterbacks emerging. To me, this is just the kind of fun competition that you let the best man win, and you don't have to kind of draw battle lines on this. Terrence, thanks for being back with us. The question I was asking you is that do you think that we can avoid with this quarterback competition the kind of like negative arguing that seemed to go on sometimes with like JT Stetson or maybe Fromm Fields years ago or maybe other examples of the past? To me, this one doesn't seem to be one of those quarterback competitions where you necessarily should expect a whole lot of negativity. Is that fair in your mind?
I think it's fair, but I think it's never going to be negative amongst the players. But
yeah.
we know that there's going to be a part of the fan base want a certain quarterback, and it's always going to be a back and forth. Doesn't matter what the data or the statistics say inside the building. Fans are going to want who they believe is better, and I can understand it. And a lot of times it gets a little frustrated because they just looking from a fan perspective and not a coach's data. Because I can tell you this. There are going to be second-level data that's going to go into this competition to show that which quarterback has actually won the job. And it's not just going to be from a spring game. It's going to be from the leadership in the weight room. It's going to be how the meetings are handled. It's going to be from spring practice. It's going to be the spring game. It's probably going to go into fall camp. So it's going to be a lot of talking, a lot of data, a lot of who has command of this team and this offense. Person's going to win the job. But from the fans' perspective, I still believe there's going to be negative fighting amongst who should win and who shouldn't win it.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. And I guess this is one of the tough jobs for a coach there too, Terrence, from the standpoint when the Georgia players are interviewed during spring practice, they'll be asked about quarterback. I can already tell you right now what they're going to say. They're going to say something to the effect of, we just feel like all three of these guys give us a chance to win, and all three of these guys are just outstanding, and everything is always equal, and everything's whatever. You know how that goes. That's the way the players seemingly are kind of coached up to speak. But my guess is, though, that behind closed doors, while you say it won't create a division and any contention among the players, and I believe you're probably right about that, players do have opinions, right? I mean, the players who are watching these guys competing each and every day, the players sort of have their belief as to who's doing the best, whether it be these three this year or two guys in the past or whatever else. Players do form opinions about this kind of stuff during practice, don't they?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, you just look at the fanfare from the players that Stetson got. So those players understood what Stetson brought to the table. And there's a lot of fans that still don't believe in Stetson after winning us 2 national championships and he's done what he's done. Those players are there every day and understand what the player brings to the table. So the love affair for Stetson from the players was real. That wasn't fake. That wasn't something that they was told to say or just a PR standpoint. That was real. So those players will, from their body language, from the way they speak, will tell you which quarterback they prefer. And that's the point of playing quarterback. Stetson won over the team. These quarterbacks have to win over the team because when you win over the team, these players will fight for you. And you can see that those players fought for Stetson. And Nolan said it all the time. You know, Stetson is his quarterback, and one of these quarterbacks has to win over the team.
Let's change the subject here for a moment. I was talking to wide receivers a little bit on one of the shows earlier this week, and One of the things I kind of find interesting is that when you look at the two transfer additions, Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett, Georgia actually has on its roster at the wide receiver spot, or the pass-catching spot, if you will, for 2023, 4 of the top 17 receivers from the SEC a year ago. Terrence, to me, on paper, I don't know that Georgia's ever had a more prolific collection of pass catchers coming into a season than it has right now. Now, obviously, we know how good Brock Bowers is. He's kind of a part of this. But even if you push Bowers aside from him, and if you just look at Lab McConkey, what he did for a full season, if you look at what Ra did at Mississippi State, what Dominic Lovett did, and I still don't think people are fully acquainted with themselves how effective Lovett was in that Missouri offense a year ago without much of a quarterback to speak of throwing him the ball. You look at what Arian Smith did in the Peach Bowl against Ohio State, and Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, I think, quietly had a pretty good year last season too, better than some folks might have realized. To me, this seems like the best collection of receivers Georgia has ever had on paper to begin a season under Kirby Smart. You obviously know better than I do. What do you think about this group here right now?
I think you're 100% right. I think from top to bottom, that room is loaded with talent. I think there's been times where the top of the list is better. I think with Jermaine Burton and George Pickett was probably a little bit better just talent-wise, but from top to bottom, this team is loaded. And you just look at, and I've said this before, if you look at the receiving class that he brought in, it was about downfield speed. And if you trot out Arian Smith, C.J. Smith, you trot out Anthony Evans, and the other receiver from Philly, I'm pretty sure that is a 4x1 team that the track team will have problems with. That's how fast they are. So this team has gotten faster on the outside. Ladd is not slow. Ladd is one of the fastest guys. So you can see where Kirby is going with this. He understands the dynamic that those guys have to be. I mean, you look at Ohio State, the dynamic that they bring. When Alabama was a few years ago having 4 first-rounders at that position, having that type of guys open up everything. And it's having a generational tight end helps as well.
No, I think that's exactly right. And to kind of follow up on the Lovett thing here a little bit too. How much of Dominic Lovett have you watched? I know you love watching film of these guys. And how much of a different dimension do you think he has a chance to provide to this Georgia offense?
I think he's going to bring a dynamic playmaking ability from the slot. I don't think we have had since probably Isaiah McKenzie. He is a guy that I've watched. I mean, I've watched him when we played up. When we signed him, I went back and watched some of his stuff on YouTube. And he's a guy that's going to be able to control the middle of the field just with his playmaking ability. Now you really have another guy that's different from Brock that can control the middle of the field, different receivers, different body type, and then you add the playmakers that we have on the outside. That's just going to bring a whole different dimension to their offense. And you've got to be able to have guys that can take the top off defensive, because you have two guys that control the middles, the safeties. Are you going to give up the deep ball, or are you going to come down on dig routes or sit routes and try to cover Brock or Dominic? So it's put off defenses in a unique situation to having guys that are downfield threat and guys who can control the middle of the field.
We'll let you go on this. We just got a pretty impressive collection of performances from Georgia guys in the NFL Scouting Combine last week. When it's all said and done, I know we talked about this some last week, how many of these Georgia guys, there's potential for 5 of them, I think anyway, how many of these Georgia guys do you think eventually emerge as first-round picks next month?
Jaden Carter, definitely.
Yeah.
The left tackle, Brock.
Yeah.
Broderick Jones, I think will slip in the first round. I also think we have 2 more that's possible. I think Nolan probably played himself back into the first round. And I think Darnell has an outside chance to be a first rounder, and Keeley also have an outside chance to be a first rounder. So if I just had to bet my money on it, I think we, and this is going to sound like a spades game, I think we got 2 in the possible.
Terrence, I like that. That's a good way to say it. I like that. That is a good way to say it indeed. Well, I know you've been working hard with that bubble training here right now, getting these guys ready for their own high school spring practices and getting ready to move on that next phase of their career there as well. So for people who want more of the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy and the stuff that you're doing on a daily basis here right now, each and every week, how can folks get more information from you?
Oh, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, great stuff. Thanks for your time, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think that Terrence says a lot of interesting things there, especially when it comes to the draft, in that, like, right now it seems like, hey, sky-high evaluation of Nolan Smith. That's likely to stick, I would say. I think that Broderick Jones, with the athleticism, has probably proved himself to be a true first-round pick. And obviously tons of praise out there for Darnell Washington, which is great to see. The discussion is going to continue around Keely Ringo. It seems like right now there's a lot of positivity around these guys in the first round of the NFL draft. And I believe in many cases that's likely to continue. You got Pro Day coming up next week, and obviously that'll be a part of the discussion too. What you'll also see around some of these other prospective first-round picks is they'll have their own chance to earn buzz. They'll have some of that there too, is that there is a nature of some of these Georgia guys, that I think they still kind of feel like swing prospects a little bit. In other words, you'll be watching intently closely on that Thursday night in April to see how many of those names really do get called. And I hope it is 5. It'd be awesome to do back-to-back years for Georgia having 5 first-round picks. That would be incredible. And watching how this debate continues from here after the emphatic statement made last week at the NFL Scouting Combine, that is going to be a lot of fun. And speaking of having a lot of fun, how about cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean? Obviously, we're getting ready for our own DawgNation cruise coming up, and it's been really fun to watch all of you talk about your own Royal Caribbean cruise you got ready to take. We're going to have one of those for our Golden Shoe a little bit later on. We highlighted already for Golden Shoe this week. One of our DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. I believe our own Kaylee Mansell, I believe she's on her cruise ship here right now, not to put her business out there, but I believe that's the case. So we got a lot of folks enjoying some great Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. And if you've heard us talking about this, it's time now to make your own decision. Get on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. We're going to be on Independence of the Seas next month, right there around the NFL draft time, for our second ever cruise with DawgNation. And you can take your own cruise and make DawgNation be a part of it. A lot of you, when you go on these Royal Caribbean cruises, and I love it when you do this, you share that picture with me, that social media kind of connection with me, and I love to see the fun that you're having. And if you want to schedule your own, book your own Royal Caribbean cruise, time now to reach out to our friend Jessica Slater, great travel agent, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. I still haven't shown the picture. Jessica and I were actually, this was kind of a coincidence. It wasn't planned. I think the issue is she takes so many cruises, I take so many cruises. We were bound to be on the same one at some point in time. We were on Wonder of the Seas together a few weeks ago. We took a picture together, so I'll have to put that on the screen here at some point in time. But anyway, you can call Jessica, 770-718-9147, and she'll get you hooked up. Maybe at this point in time, it's probably a little late for the DawgNation cruise, but obviously all kinds of other cruise vacations you can get going on that spring break, summer vacation, heading towards holidays, or January of 2024, the debut of Icon of the Seas. That's going to be awesome. That's unbelievable experience you're going to get a chance to have. RoyalDogs.com. You can find out more about what Jess has got going on for you there too. RoyalDogs.com. All right, let us now get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Nick Saban seemingly has been out in the media a whole bunch as of late. And some other comments of his that are getting some attention right now is kind of a forceful defense of Bryce Young. He calls Bryce Young his point guard and basically kind of pushes back against anybody at the NFL draft evaluation level who thinks that Bryce Young's too small to succeed as an NFL quarterback. And he kind of made a little bit of a statement. I don't have the full quote to read to you. I might have to paraphrase this. But something of the effect of, hey, you see the guy with the prototypical size, the prototypical arm strength, and yet he didn't win anything in college. What's the explanation for that? And listen, I'm in total defense of Nick Saban on this. I think he's absolutely right. Some people sort of thought this was a subtweet of Anthony Richardson. Even if it was, that makes me only like the statement that much more. But it's not just because I'm like a Gator hater, although I proudly am. I think that what Saban is saying here is both right and B, I think it's the right thing to do. And you don't hear me say Nick Saban does the right thing very much, but in this particular case, I believe that he is. Here is what I think coaches ought to do. Coaches, unless they have a very good reason not to, they ought to stand on the table for their guys. And that's one of the things I love. You know that audio we played for you, it's like 2 weeks ago now, but we played the audio of Brandon Staley talking about Jamari Salyer and the benefit that Salyer brought to that Chargers offensive line this season. And in the midst of that comment from the NFL Network, Staley talked about calling Kirby Smart, and Kirby Smart was like, I am telling you, I promise you, this guy is in good physical health. This guy can do what needs to be done. Now, Smart's going to tell the truth in a situation like this, but he's also going to stand on the table for his guy. So in the case of Nick Saban, listen, there's a lot of things that Nick Saban does that I think are a little bit weaselly. But in the case of this particular thing, yeah, I want you to support your quarterback. I want you to be out there, not just saying nice things when you're asked. I want you volunteering information of you're an idiot if you pass on Bryce Young. What was the thing that one time said about Michael Jordan about, hey, listen, you need a center, you draft him, you play him at center. In other words, sometimes you just got to sort of argue for your guy. In this particular case, I don't mind Saban arguing for Bryce Young. And I also just believe it's true, which is that, hey, if my guy produced in college, that ought to be all you need to know. And Bryce Young clearly did. He had, 47 touchdown passes in 2021. And if all the prototypical size and height and arm strength, if all that's supposed to work, then how come it doesn't? Because there are plenty of guys who sort of look like, quarterback built in a factory. They don't do damn thing in the NFL, and they didn't, do it, at the college level either. So I think Nick Saban's right to ask if that prototypical stuff works, and how come it doesn't? I think that's a very fair question to ask. In this particular case, rare instance of me siding with Nick Saban. I saw where, do you know who Dusty Dvorak is? This is a tweet that got sort of tweeted in my orbit. So Dvorak is a radio host on Sirius XM radio, not necessarily the ultimate tastemaker for college football, but he was out there kind of talking about LSU as kind of a dark horse team that could win the national championship this year. And it's more the opinion than the opinionator that are interesting to me on this. This is one of the rare examples, I think, right now of anybody that we hear. Maybe we'll hear more of this kind of stuff this summer because we're going to see preseason magazines start coming out and, everybody kind of move truly into their sort of hot take time of year, talking season, if you will. So maybe we'll hear more about LSU at the time. But I think it's really interesting that thus far, early days here of 2023, we haven't heard much in the way of LSU, who's going to be a preseason top 10 team, who is the reigning champion in the SEC West. We haven't heard much talk about LSU being the team that Brian Kelly year two that could take the next step. The other day, ESPN had, 8 different writers who put out their playoff picks. We had tons of those guys that picked both Alabama and Georgia to be in the playoff. At least one guy picked Alabama, not Georgia. But we didn't hear anybody from that ESPN crop the other day that picked LSU to be in the playoff, which is kind of a small sample of opinions. But nonetheless, it's reflective of something that thus far people sort of think that the LSU thing from a year ago is kind of a one-and-done type deal. But honestly, I'm not quite so sure when that has to be the case. Here's what I think. To me, the best path for LSU this upcoming season is I think they ought to try to find a way to play both quarterbacks. There's a level of athleticism that Jaden Daniels has that makes him very dangerous. When Jalen Carter's not picking him up and throwing him over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, Daniels, when healthy, can be a pretty effective quarterback with his leg. But you saw in the second half of the SEC championship game, Garrett Nussmeier is a very dangerous weapon when he throws the football. If LSU can find a way to play both those quarterbacks together, A, it keeps Nussmeier from transferring, but B, it just gives you one more thing for opposing defenses to think about. I've told you before, I'm not quite so sure that LSU doesn't have 2 quarterbacks better than anything Alabama has on its roster. And for an LSU team that beat Alabama a year ago, are you left to conclude that anything about that victory looked like a fluke? And if LSU can beat Alabama, well, who else couldn't they beat from the SEC West? I still think there's a chasm between LSU and Georgia, no matter how good the Tigers turn out to be. But frankly, there may be a chasm between Georgia and Alabama based on what we kind of see Alabama bringing back this season there as well. So the point on all this is I am not willing right now to make a case for LSU being a second SEC team to go along with Georgia and make the college football playoff. But I do think that given the fact they did win the division a year ago, they are being under-discussed. And if you're going to make the case for Alabama kind of restoring itself in the SEC West and finishing as the final winner of the SEC West, you better be able to give me some inside information on quarterback. Either a guy like Ty Simpson may win it, or B, if Simpson does win it, how good he can be. Listen, maybe Ty Simpson's the next whoever. I don't know. Alabama's had a pretty good string of quarterbacks here. Maybe Simpson's the next one. It doesn't appear that Jalen Milroe is. So I don't know what that means. But if you are really touting Alabama right now, which some of the folks seem to be, at the expense of LSU, you are really putting a lot of faith in your ability to make sense of what it right now is a totally unknown variable, which is how good Alabama's going to be at quarterback. I talked about the Arch Manning thing off the top of the show. That I had some guy tell me the other day that he was glad that Arch Manning didn't come to Georgia because of the hysterical nature of the quarterback competition that might produce. If you want a little bit of evidence for how true that is, let me show you this. Football Scoop's a website that I like. They typically cover coaching moves. I don't know. This is a little bit of a different kind of story for them. But nonetheless, I saw this tweet. I was like, I'm not quite so sure I want this at Georgia. Football Scoop writing on March 8th. Texas braces for the most hyped, most insane quarterback battle in college football history. I think I can probably do without that. I'll take the quietest, most, tamest, most low-stakes quarterback competition at Georgia, where the eventual winner will be just kind of tabbed to go out and win a third straight national championship. I think I'll take the relatively low stakes of the Georgia quarterback competition. Can I just say that one more time? I just want to read this one more time. And then what Zach Barnett from Football Scoop calls most hyped, most insane quarterback battle in college football history. That sort of seems like one of those pull quotes you'd put above the title in some movie poster. I don't know that I want hype and insanity right now. I just don't, because I'm not really quite so sure much hype and insanity would serve Georgia well. The lack of hype, the lack of insanity around Stetson Bennett seem to be pretty good things these last couple of years. And a quarterback cut from similar cloth for Georgia moving forward, maybe that's not quite such a bad thing either. Listen, and this is not like sour grapes on Arch Manning. He may go on to be great. We don't really know. I mean, I would have told you when he was maybe on his way to UGA. I still didn't know how good he's going to be. This is not an anti-Manning take, but famous last names have a way of producing a certain sort of TMZ-ization of the college football conversation, and hype and insanity around Georgia. I think I probably could do without that. So that's a little bit of a thing to bolster the point we made early on in the show, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I want to talk some UGA recruiting here in a moment. We'll do more of this on Friday show with Jeff Sintel tomorrow. But first, I want to show you this cool thing. You've heard me kind of do this with you before. I want to make sure that you're aware of this. So if you live in the Athens area or anywhere around the state of Georgia, you may have heard of Jittery Joe's coffee. Now, this is 100%, is it Arabica? Is that how you say Arabica coffee? It comes from a great part of the world, famous for making great coffee. Colombia, Nicaragua, Guatemala, these are places where those great coffee beans are made, grown, I guess is the right way to say that. The Arabica beans. Jittery Joe's famous for kind of sourcing the very best coffee you can get, and that's what's made Jittery Joe such a beloved coffee brand for such a long time. But now they're partnering with UGA to kind of take this to the next level. This is an officially licensed commemorative tin with Jittery Joe's coffee on the inside, celebrating the Georgia back-to-back national championships. You got the back-to-back logo right here. You got the Power G there on the top. If you kind of roll this can around, you see, information about the back-to-back champion dogs, the schedule stuff here, there as well. This is the kind of thing that even after you enjoy the coffee, you'll keep this tin, you'll put it on your shelf or your basement, wherever else. You'll kind of do this forever. This is really, really good stuff from our friends at Jittery Joe's. So if you go to jitteryjoes.com, you can pick up your official commemorative tin. A lot of you want as many different collector's items as you can get to celebrate the back-to-back national champions for Georgia. Well, Jittery Joe's has partnered with UGA to give you one more great option here, this commemorative tin from Jittery Joe's. Check out jitteryjoes.com for more on that. All right, with that said, we saw a decommit yesterday from the class of 2024, running back Tovanni Mizell. This is a 4-star. This is a guy that a lot of people really like. I think he is a good player out of DeMatha Catholic up there in Maryland. This is, I think, a good player. But it seems like the relationship with Georgia, this is him on the screen. First of all, shout out to Mizell for not using the Notes app. This looks so much better than the regular Notes app thing does. It's not super, technologically advanced, but much. And by the way, also, shout out as well for making a shorter statement, because when we do the decommitment thing on the show, it's always one of those things where we read the first sentence of the decommitment, we read the last sentence, but everything else in between we kind of skip over. This is just sort of straight and to the point. He says, I'd like to announce that I'll be decommitting from the University of Georgia. My recruitment is now 100% open. And that's sort of all you need to know here. I also like the fact that he's going third-person nickname, Tovanni Boogeyman Mizell. So he is stepping away from his Georgia commitment. Seems like Georgia here, I guess you can read between the lines on this in a number of different ways, but one way or another, Mizell stepping away from Georgia, opening up his recruitment. Georgia obviously recently took the commitment of Dwight Phillips, and I don't have a bad thing to say about Mizell. He may go on to be a great college running back. Obviously, he has a very good chance to be a very good running back, just given where he's ranked. But if this is a little bit of a reprioritization for Georgia in terms of the style of running back that's going after, I think that could be kind of a good thing. I think one of the things you've seen from Georgia kind of across the board with some of its offensive playmaker recruiting. It seems like as of late that Georgia has put a priority on speed. Some of the wide receivers that's brought into the program. In the case of Phillips, who's kind of listed as an athlete, but at the college level expected to be a running back. That's a guy who's just kind of a blazing speedster type guy. Putting that speed dimension in the Georgia running back room, I think, could be a really good thing. Everybody's always going to speculate about what happens when a guy like Mizell steps away from a commitment. Was this Georgia kind of souring on him? Was this Mizell not feeling the love from Georgia? Whatever it ends up being. One way or another, the one thing we can know is, okay, the commitment that Georgia recently took was from a guy in Phillips who, from a stylistic standpoint, seems to be a little bit different than what Mizell kind of brings to the table. In this particular case, I think what Georgia needs more of is what Dwight Phillips brings to the table. So, as we say, in this time of year, it feels like we do this, a few times every year. You wish Mizell well. I'm sure he'll land at a great spot. I'm sure he'll go on to have a very good career, as a lot of guys who've been on Georgia's recruiting radar have been. But in the case of Phillips, who Georgia seems to really like at that running back spot for the class of 2024, and probably eventually pairing a running back to go with him, I think Georgia might be in pretty good hands, giving itself a little bit different style of back than it's had in the past. I think that's kind of a fun thing. And so a little bit of a recruiting note. I'll find out from Jeff tomorrow what he thinks about this. He'll be with us as he usually is on Friday, but did want to make you aware of a decommitment from the class of 2024. And to wrap things up today, we talked about DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers taking their Royal Caribbean Cruise vacations. In fact, we have a preview of a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation here today as a part of our Golden Shoe. This is unprecedented for Golden Shoe, a request for fan participation. So a lot of you who watch us on video, you know about Matt Rukavina, who comments on various comment sections. He's also active on Twitter. He's Dog in Houston on Twitter. And he's got a request from the rest of our DawgNation Daily audience about his own upcoming Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. He says, it's my Golden Shoe nominee here. Which is the better shirt to cruise around with Royal Caribbean next week? And tagging Royal Caribbean there as well. Matt, very media-savvy young man. He says, the winner will be worn for my big 40 on Allure of the Seas next week. So Matt's turning 40. That's a big deal. Going to be on Allure of the Seas. Very fun opportunity there. And he's got two different choices. The red back-to-back national champions, the National Champion World Tour t-shirt there as well, and white with the Georgia G underneath that on that. Two great choices. If you want to hit up at @dog_in_Houston, our buddy Matt Rukavina on Twitter, you can weigh in. Let Matt choose the t-shirt to rub it in the faces of everybody on Allure of the Seas next week that not only is Matt turning 40 in style on a wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise ship, he's also doing so as a two-time national champion. So y'all help Matt out with that. We'll make him our Golden Shoe winner for today, and we'll let you know that the Florida Gators, they have no such deliberations taking place. 233 days from right now, it gets even worse. Georgia beats them again in Jacksonville. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We will look forward to talk to you then. All right, and on video time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. They take good care of you. We love our buddy Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews and his entire team. We love the work they do. All right, we're going to take some comments here. Now, I'm going to start on YouTube. I started on YouTube yesterday, but I'm going to do that again today because that's the kind of discretion that I reserve the right to enjoy. All right, let us see. T-Mart 42, critical of Matt Rukavina winning the Golden Shoe. Spencer Clark wondering who's going to get slapped at the Oscars this Sunday. Are the Oscars this Sunday? I saw some of the Chris Rock special where he kind of went in on Will Smith. Thought it was okay. Pretty funny. Jonathan Aaron says, if you had your 2 first-round picks, who would your 2 picks be? I think I would take both Carter and Washington, one offensive and one defensive. So if you're asking me for, like, who would I have the greatest certainty has the longest, most successful NFL career, I'd take Carter and Broderick Jones. I think that Broderick Jones, fits the mold of what offensive tackles are like in the NFL right now, in a league that's just become a little bit more up-tempo, certainly throws the ball a lot more. You know, the ability to do what Brod does with the athleticism, I think, probably matters. I think that Broderick Jones, to me, comes across as a very safe bet here. So if this is on the basis of the longest, most successful career, I'll take Jalen Carter. I mean, there's a chance that, Jalen Carter's Aaron Donald. I mean, there's a chance that he is that good as a player. And by the way, speaking of Aaron Donald, Shout out to our buddy Chuck Smith. A lot of you know we used to do some stuff together with Chuck, and he's been on this show from time to time. I really value Chuck's opinion on the pass rush. He's been on here before with some very candid remarks about, what he sees from Georgia. He's a Tennessee guy. We don't really hold that against him. But the point of all this is the former Falcon Chuck Smith was yesterday named outside linebackers coach with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm so happy for Chuck on that. This is a guy who's dedicated his life to football. And, Chuck's a little bit like Terrence and some of these guys are that just love their position. John Stinchcombe's like this for the offensive line. They just love their position. And, he spent his entire life studying how to be a good pass rusher and how to have effective pass rush moves, and gets a chance to teach that now at the Baltimore Ravens, get those guys, playing good football. A lot of Falcons fans wish he could have been a coach at the Falcons. I guess I wish that too. But pretty clearly a big job for Chuck, and I'm happy for him on that. So I just wanted to mention that. But anyway, I forgot what we were talking about. Oh, but the two guys I'd probably take, safest bets, I believe, Broderick Jones, Jalen Carter, and I transitioned to the Chuck Smith thing because Chuck trained Aaron Donald at one point in time. So there you go. That's where that's explaining that stream of consciousness in there. Foster Moss, I can't touch that. I did see that story, but I can't touch that. I can't touch that, but I did see it. Skytime9 says Ernest Green and Amarius Mims are literally our version of Art Shell and Gene Upshaw. Great blast from the past name there for sure. Difference makers this year. Yeah, I mean, listen, it's always fun to hear former Georgia players saying nice things about current Georgia players. And typically the Georgia players are pretty good about kind of playing along with something like that. It just kind of makes for a fun conversation to hear those words of praise. But in the case of like last week, when it comes to McClendon and Broderick on Ernest Green, I take that pretty seriously. And I do think Green, assuming he emerges as the starter when he's fully healthy, and he may not be necessarily right away, but assuming he's fully healthy, emerging as the starter, it is fair to point out that Ernest Green's going to be in a huge, huge role for Georgia without very much experience to lean on from the past. But that doesn't mean he can't be absolutely equal to that job. I mean, Georgia started Andrew Thomas as a true freshman in 2017. I mean, a flat-out true freshman, and he was one of the best players, on the team there at that time. So Green's lack of experience is not a necessarily detriment to him, and obviously it'd be nice to have some playing experience like Amarius Mims got for Georgia over the course of the last couple of years. But no doubt Green is in a huge role for Georgia, and until you see him do it for a full season, there's at least going to be some questions about it. That's all, I think, pretty fair and pretty real. DMart42 says, and this is a good comment, he says, Green's getting deserved hype, but how competitive is Monroe Freeling going to be in that tackle competition? He's an alien at the left tackle spot. Yeah, I think that Freeling's also really important too, because this is where you have to be kind of honest about something. Like, I am not too certain about Georgia's tackle depth beyond Mims and Green. If we assume that Mims is probably one of the best players in the country, I think that's a fairly safe assumption. And if you look at Green as being the kind of prospect that literally every team would want, this idea of, well, how good do you feel about a tackle that hasn't played? There are like 129, 130 teams that would be thrilled to have Ernest Green vying to be their starting tackle this year. That's a very advantageous position for Georgia to find itself in, with potential of adding Ernest Green as a starter. So even if you say, man, the two offensive tackles that Georgia's going to have as starters are both outstanding, there is still a look beyond that of, well, what happens if one of these guys get hurt? And guess what? Last year in the national championship in the college football playoff, one of Georgia's starting offensive tackles got hurt. That's one of those things where you may have to test your depth at some point in time. And right now, I would say that Georgia's offensive tackle depth beyond two assumed very good starters is a little bit, we don't quite know. So a Monroe Freeling stepping onto campus and being ready to be, Georgia always seems to have that super sub offensive tackle. That guy that, well, if you really had to go to this guy, you'd feel okay with that. Monroe Freeling needs to be that guy for Georgia this year. He does. And my guess is, Freeling probably, you like his athleticism, that mobility. You kind of like the fact that he brings a little athleticism to the offensive tackle position. My guess is they're going to probably ask him to add some muscle weight, if I had to guess. My guess is at a place like Georgia, that's probably, a fairly easy thing to do because of the the science you get a chance to kind of lean on in that direction. But I think that Freeling is a pretty important player for Georgia because he may be the guy, even as a true freshman, that gets asked to bolster that tackle depth. Otherwise, you might not know so much about. Paul Moon says, we got dudes in the offensive line room. I keep saying it. Like Micah Morris, hoping we keep him. His conversation with Jeff was great. Yeah, Morris is one of those guys that we have not heard a ton from, and sometimes that raises a red flag of, well, does that mean this guy's, looking to bolt? But, there is still a lot of belief that Morris can be a very, very good offensive lineman. I think you're right about that. Okay, on Facebook, let us see. Lucy Bowers-Boykin in here. Good to see her. Alan Verbanchik says, Truss, Mims, Ratledge, SVP are experienced. Those are the 4 starters. Just need to worry about only one more. That's true. And I'm a big believer, and y'all know I'm not a former player, coach. I mean, I don't try to play that card necessarily. But I'm a big believer that offensive lines should be understood as units. I think how an offensive line plays together. Now, by the way, Kirby Smart disputes this, so I guess he knows more than I do. But nonetheless, I think my overall sense of the offensive line is that guys work together to play the position. I think you see a lot of this in sports now too. Like I think baseball infields are becoming a little bit more like that. Some units defensively in baseball, starting fives in basketball, they're constructed to work together. I think offensive lines are a little bit like that too. And so let's say, just for the sake of conversation, let's say that, fresh, brand new starter Ernest Green, let's say he had some growing pains because he is playing for the first time. It's at least a possibility that could happen. Allen's point about, well, yeah, but he's got, Cedric Prine started 600 games for Georgia. Ratledge has been around. Mims has, been in the games before too, that you've got enough experience that a guy like that can kind of lean on a little bit, which I think true. Matt Rugavina says the National Champions World Tour T-shirt, by the way, has the edge in his golden shoe debate. I typically would lean in the direction of the red T-shirt, but because you're going to be on Allure of the Seas, the idea of taking the World Tour just sort of makes more sense. I think that would probably be my vote as well, Matt. Probably would be. William Camacho, thank you for the kind words. I certainly appreciate that. Thank you very much, William. Very, very nice. And, yeah, you better believe we are enjoying back-to-back national championships with sights set on another. By the way, speaking of player comparisons, Ryan Walker, who always has some great kind of old-school comparisons, says JDJ reminds me of Jesse Tuggle. Attacks ball carriers, very vocal, definitely shows up with bad intentions when he hits offensive players, definitely going to be a first-round draft pick. I like that comparison. Tuggle, obviously, one of the great Falcons of all time. And, that kind of comes in an era, and I don't know this is true in the NFL as much as it used to be because – everybody's got red zone now. Everybody's watching all these games all the time. But it used to be a guy like Tuggle doing it in Atlanta. He just never got the attention that he deserved because he didn't play for the Cowboys, he didn't play for the Steelers, didn't play, in New York. That somehow Tuggle just got overlooked for a long time. And that's one of the things that made me so happy about the 98 Falcons making the Super Bowl. Guys who had been here and been doing it, Jesse Tuggle may be the best example of this, finally got some of the attention that they deserved. And I think now in the NFL, there's just so much national coverage of the NFL that most NFL players at a high level are more famous than they used to be. You don't have to play for the Steelers or the Cowboys to get the attention that you deserve. But Tuggle's an example of a guy who did it at a very high level in Atlanta for a long time and probably just did not get enough deserved attention. Pete Williams also agreeing about Jesse Tuggle. Kent Holcomb says, going to have a great team this season with lots of experience coming back. More than after the 21 season, and look what we did in 22. A 3-beat is unquestionably possible. Totally agree with that. And I agree with your point that this offseason feels different than last offseasons did because it doesn't seem like you're asking as many pointed questions about how do you replace so-and-so. But as I pointed out on one of my vacation shows, when you do make the list of what Georgia has to replace, it's not going to be a prevailing narrative for Georgia this offseason, but it's not a small list of names either. So because I'm such a contrarian, I'm always kind of going the other opposite direction. When people are zigging, I'm zagging. That's just kind of the way I go. I think last year people talked way too much about what Georgia had to replace. They were still defending national champions typically make the playoff. This year, I almost think there's maybe not enough discussion of who Georgia has to replace. I'll start at quarterback, where people have a lot of enthusiasm about Carson Beck or one of the other guys. I get all of that. Stetson Bennett still played at a very high level. This is the most accomplished quarterback in program history. That's an example of, right now, no one seems to make a very big deal out of replacing Stetson Bennett, but let's see how true that ends up being. I mentioned Broderick Jones, too, in this regard, that I don't know how much Broderick Jones we talked about during the season. We talked about the Georgia offensive line overall. I don't know how much Broderick Jones individually we talked about, but when you see a guy like this, the NFL draft scouts are falling all over themselves to praise, you're left to conclude, well, gosh, he must have been pretty good for Georgia this past season, and obviously he was. That's another example of, hey, we expect whether it's Mims or Green to kind of slide right into that tackle spot on the left side and everything will be fine. It probably will. But Broderick Jones probably made it look easier than it actually is, too. So keep that in mind. Joseph Kennedy says, what has the higher percentage of happening? Tiger Woods winning this year's Masters or Bama getting Vandy as a permanent opponent? That's really pretty funny. We've obviously heard Nick Saban not too happy about the suggested permanent opponents for his Crimson Tide. The team that's going to get Vandy is going to be Auburn. And I sort of get this. It's like if you're Auburn, and listen, none of us shed any tears for the Tigers. We understand that. But they're going to be handed Alabama and Georgia as permanent opponents. Like, that's not fun. That's not fun. Hey, every year you play Bama, every year you play Georgia. And so it seems like they're going to get tossed the bone of playing Vanderbilt as their third permanent opponent. All right, let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. Let's see. Brer Double Dog says, and this is, like, I wish this weren't true, but I think it probably is. He says, sadly, Jesse Tuggle had so many tackles because the defense couldn't get off the field. Unfortunately, there's an element of that that's probably true, that his tackle numbers were aided by the fact there were so many tackles to be made. Unfortunately, that's probably true. DT says LSU is going to be better with Keyshawn. He calls him Boutte in the comment section for being gone addition by subtraction. The Boutte thing last year seemed to be pretty weird, where, I mean, he's a total non-factor in the Florida State game. Seemed to be pouting a little bit. By the end of the season, kind of playing a little bit better. I'm sure Brian Kelly may be happy to kind of move on. Randy Hall asked a good question. Who's the kicker going to be this season? I don't really know. Is it going to be Zirkle? Because, Zirkle's still here. Going to be the guy they brought in. I always get Woodyard and Woodward confused. It's Woodward. I don't know. That's a great question. I have no idea. I mean, if I gave you an opinion, I'd just be guessing. Johnny Surf Dog says, how about them dogs? Strongest roster in the nation, baby. You better believe that. Brer Double Dog, happy to be mentioned. We try to mention as many people as we can. We do indeed. Rambo also pointing out that Jesse Tuggle was the hammer. There have been a couple of hammers in the NFL, but Jesse was the hammer. Jesse the Hammer Tuggle. I like that era of Falcons football. Late 90s, that's good times. I went to a few of those games in 98. That was fun. What else? Matt Rukavine on the subject of wearing that tropical-themed gear. Yeah, I like the UGA tropical-themed gear for the cruises. I enjoy that. I mean, I'm one of those guys. I sort of feel like you call them like the Hawaiian shirt or whatever else. Like, that's a good look for, not say good look. That's a better look. Like, shirts that are designed to be worn untucked are typically, a decent look for a lot of us. Let's see what else. Senior Dog 54 says, I'd like for your son to be the starting quarterback at Texas and not be named Ark. She says the first time the poor guy throws an incompletion, the boo bird's going to come out. Yeah, it creates a little bit of hysteria for sure. Woodrow checking in to say what up, people. But yeah, you're right, Senior Dog. It creates a little bit of hysteria for sure. Doggy says, did BA do the Dirty Bird in the 90s? Yeah, you better believe I did. I don't know if I still can or not. Is that kind of it? I like the Dirty Bird. I do. Some of the other stuff I don't know that I liked as much. The Pass the Magic, I don't quite know that. And back then, Ray Buchanan used to do the Dirty Bird a different way. He had his own Dirty Bird. But yeah, I kind of like the Jamal Anderson Dirty Bird style. Yeah, I don't mind that. Let's see what else. Randy Hall says we need to video our draft party on the cruise ship. We might do some of that, but there's also an element of what happens on the cruise ship stays on the cruise ship. Let's see what else. DMart42 says kicker is a question mark that nobody talks about. Yeah, we're probably guilty of not talking about kicker enough. I don't really like field goal tries. I sort of wish teams just go for touchdowns all the time. We are probably guilty of not talking about kicker enough because, like, I had a chance to talk to Jack Podlesny a couple times during the playoff run. He's a great guy. He's a very good kicker. And I just remember thinking, we should have probably talked more about Podlesny during his career because he was very good. Very good. Taylor Russell, DMart42, shouting out Falcons of the past, Algie Crumpler and Warwick Dunn and TJ Duckett, for sure. Let's see what else. What else is going on here? Mike Brown also pointing out that Stetson Bennett was the longtime Georgia holder, and he's gone now too. And I guess the one hold that he didn't make for the extra point when Georgia was up 100 points in the national championship game, Bennett didn't hold, and they didn't miss it. So maybe that's a harbinger of doom to come here or there as well, is that Bennett didn't act as the holder on that final extra point, and Georgia didn't miss it. So there you go. Jay Shipe says, I agree with Lane Kiffin about fourth downs. Yeah, that may be the one thing that Kiffin's right about. Kiffin does go for it a lot on fourth down, which I do like. Fred Gunn, obviously going back to the Eugene Robinson thing, I remember exactly where I was when I heard about that. Because this is, 98's relatively early internet. So it's not like people had, like access to information the way they do now. I remember I was sitting at church on Super Bowl Sunday, and this is like right as the service was starting. Somebody, a friend of mine, was on the pew in front of me, turned around and said, "Did you hear about Eugene Robinson?" And I just remember being, oh my gosh. What a disaster. What a disaster. Disaster. And I just remember because obviously Georgia football is my favorite thing, but I'm a big Atlanta sports fan. Grew up here in the Atlanta area, big fan of the local teams. If you're talking about single game performances, the Falcons win against 15-1 Minnesota in the Metrodome. That's one of the great single games in Atlanta sports history. And I know the Braves have won 2 World Series. The Falcons have made another Super Bowl since then. I think one of the great single days in Atlanta sports history of all time is going up to a Minnesota team, Randy Moss rookie year, team that only lost one time all year, Randall's at quarterback. That was a really, really good team, and everyone thought they were going to march their way to the Super Bowl. Atlanta had been 14-2, but Minnesota was the prohibitive favorite in that game. Atlanta won the game, beat the Vikings, beat Randy Moss. There's so much hype around the Vikings with good reason. Chris Carter, Jake Reed, the other receivers there. That's a great day. And to then think 2 weeks of just build up for a Super Bowl against Dan Reeves' old team, John Elway. And you're like the top of the sports world in a situation like that. And then the night before the dadgum game, Eugene Robinson on Biscayne Boulevard. I mean, can you just believe that? It's gut-wrenching. I remember hearing about it and how much of a funk that put me in on that Super Bowl Sunday. I remember it so well. All right, let's see. What else? Paul Moon says, up until this season, I couldn't watch field goals. I was in the bins of the Bama Natty game in 2017. I sat down in my seat. My dad had to tell me if the Bama kicker missed it to send it to overtime. Yeah, I know that feeling. Y'all talking about Sean Kemp in here. I can't do the Kemp thing. I gotta leave that alone for right now. Although you talk about another I mean, Kemp was an icon of my childhood. Like some of the Sean Kemp dunk contest stuff, that still holds up. Some of that Kemp stuff still holds up. Like some of these guys now, their dunks may be prettier, but some of the Kemp stuff was just so forceful. Like Kemp was, I mean, that is an absolute icon from my kind of younger days. And by the way, the 96 Sonics, probably an underrated team too. The team that lost to Jordan in his first, the start of his second three-peat. That Sonic team's probably pretty good. Let's see what else. All right, Michael Carvel's got a question. Let's see what the question is.
This is my DawgNation Daily world debut.
It is.
So you talked about Arch Manning earlier.
Yes.
And Crazy Insane, which
Sure.
is absolutely true.
Sure.
How do you feel about Dylan Raiola? Because it's going to be, wherever he goes, it's going to be
Sure.
crazy and insane, just like it was with Matt Stafford.
Sure. I don't have a lot of passion around the Raiola thing. I would love for him to come to Georgia. I think he's probably pretty good. I won't bat an eye if he doesn't come to Georgia. We talked about this a little bit on our post-Super Bowl show, where it's like in the NFL, you've got franchise quarterback team like Kansas City that pays Patrick Mahomes gazillion dollars. You've got Philadelphia where they're getting a good performance out of Jalen Hurts, but that's a little bit more of a balanced roster. If Georgia remains kind of the college football version of the Philadelphia Eagles, where you have a good quarterback giving you a strong performance, but you're not necessarily doing the college football version of paying him like the franchise guy, I'm kind of okay with that. I'm okay with Georgia not being a quarterback-led team. Now, if Dylan Raiola comes to UGA, I'll spike the football. I'll be very, very happy. That would be really, really exciting. He may very well mind. I know there's a lot of USC chatter right now, but who knows how all that plays out. But I don't have a lot of emotion tied up into Dylan Raiola right now. I am kind of fine with Georgia being what it has been. And, moving forward in the future, we may see more examples of that where, hey, you can put a lot of eggs in the quarterback basket, but you may not have as many eggs to spread around to the rest of your roster. And I'm not really quite so sure that works out all that well. We're going to talk about this tomorrow a little bit too. There are a lot of Pac-12 and Big 12 teams in recent years that have lost a lot of games in which they scored 28 or more points. In fact, two of the teams coming to the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma, have a good number of those there too, is that it just takes more than being pretty on offense right now. You got to be good across the board. And if not getting Raiola means that Georgia just doubles down on what has worked to the tune of 2 national championships, I'd kind of be okay with that. And at the same time, I'd be thrilled if he came here too. It's a great question. Jay Shipe says, name one college football quarterback that can stand with Byron Leftwich's legacy of giving everything in one game. First of all, I love the fact this is kind of descended into just let's remember cool stuff from the past. It may be the single best image I've ever seen. And I don't remember who Marshall was playing that day. Jay, you probably do. But when Leftwich is getting carried by his offensive lineman because he could not stand on his ankle and he's leading this comeback and they're having to lift him down the field, like that is such a great image. And I don't remember who Marshall was playing that day, and I'm ashamed to say that I don't. But that is a terrific, terrific image of Byron Leftwich during his college career there at Marshall. You are absolutely right about that. And like I said before, I love the fact that this today is just, hey, let's go back and remember a bunch of cool old stuff because I'm pretty much here for that each and every day. Alan Hampton on the subject of the permanent opponents for Georgia saying, what's the chance of having all orange permanent foes, Florida, Auburn, and Tennessee? Does not seem like Tennessee is going to be given to Georgia. And some people want that now because if you live up in North Georgia, that's your hated rival anyway in some respects. Tennessee's good at the moment, which makes the game feel more pertinent. And as who was it? Was it Paul Moon that said this yesterday? Matt Rukavina, maybe. Somebody said this. It's also just geographically close. That the sort of the sanest argument in favor of playing South Carolina and Tennessee every year is the fact that the road trip's only 3 hours from here. Very easy to get to both those places. It does not seem like Tennessee's ever been a thing here. Tennessee's going to play Alabama every year. I'm assuming they'll play Kentucky every year, and they got to play Vanderbilt every year. And that may be why Georgia doesn't get Tennessee, is because you're going to preserve the in-state rival, which Tennessee probably loves because it's Vanderbilt. They probably are also thrilled about Kentucky there as well. Kentucky, Lexington, and Knoxville are pretty close. Kentucky really views Tennessee as a rival. This is probably Kentucky's first choice, is to play Tennessee each and every year. And obviously third Saturday in October, you're going to do that. So ultimately, why Georgia-Tennessee didn't generate more discussion as an annual opponent, maybe because the annual opponents for Tennessee are just so well established. Kentucky definitely wants to play Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't mind playing the Wildcats because they're not typically very good. Vanderbilt's the in-state rival. Third Saturday in October, you want to preserve. There are really only two cross-division rivals that have to be preserved. Third Saturday, Deep South's oldest. So those are the two that have to be maintained, and it sounds like they're going to be. Paul Moon says, don't mention my name in the same sentence as some Facebook scrub. That is very funny. All right, final comments. Paul also mentioned Pennington. So Pennington's the one that threw to Randy Moss, right? Pennington, the eventual Jets first-round pick, which costed – that'd be a show in its own right, just making a list of quarterbacks the Jets have taken in the first round. But Pennington was the quarterback. Or was that Eric Kresser, the former Florida quarterback? Who was it that threw all those touchdowns to Randy Moss? Was that Kresser or was that Pennington? Paul Moon also talking about Pat White. Now, that's one I don't want to talk about. We can talk about old school fun guys, but Pat White is an old school fun guy that I don't have any interest in discussing, because that 2005 Sugar Bowl was a nightmare. That was a nightmare. A nightmare. That was a weird time in BA's life. But that game itself, first of all, the Sugar Bowl was played in Atlanta, which is confusing to enough people as it is. But what a disaster that was. Gregory Nowak says there are reports that Tennessee could be playing South Carolina, not Kentucky. Well, there you go. Is that what Dellinger had the other day? Well, I guess that everything I just said then goes up in smoke if that's the case. So there you go. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says she's glad we went long today because she's been listening for most of her drive. Well, I'm glad we could keep you company, Lucy. I really am. Thank you very much. Back at DawgNation.com. One more time. Somehow I got out of the comments. Let me get back in here. To finish up over here. Doggy says USC, Nebraska, then UGA for Iowa. That could very well be true. Could very well be true. Let's see what else. Rambo mentioning Fulton, Captain Crazy, Kuykendall. There was a high school player, I think it was at Cambridge, whose last name was Kuykendall, and I wondered if he was related to Fulton Kuykendall, but he wasn't. He wasn't. Don Jones agrees with the Falcons-Minnesota game. Yeah, for sure. All right. James Lawson. I'm not touching that. That's really funny. All right. Good stuff. All right, we got to go. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. What will the Falcons do in the draft? We don't know that, but we can read plenty of coverage on that at ajc.com. Also, Braves putting the finishing touches on spring training, trying to figure out who their starting rotation is going to be. Also, one of those big political conventions coming to Atlanta that could be happening. You can read about that. And this is actually really fun. A couple things. First of all, high school basketball state championships taking place here right now. You can read about that. And continued coverage of Kennesaw State as it makes its first trip to the big dance. And I think for the most part, we're going to kind of adopt Kennesaw State as our team here a little bit, if y'all are okay with that. I'd like to see them win. That'd be kind of fun, so we'll see if they're able to. Also, there's a fun podcast in the AJC called Go Atlanta, where you can kind of look at some of the cool stuff going on around the Atlanta area here in the month of March. Check all of that out online, ajc.com. Also, check our friends at RS Andrews out online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Y'all have a great day. Check them out. Get that air conditioning unit ready to go. Spring and summer are going to be here before you know it, so it's just $99 to get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at RS Andrews. Find them today, rsandrews.com, and we'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.